Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. By way of introduction, my name is Laurence Brett. I'm currently the interim CEO for the Association for Consultancy and Engineering, so ACE. Welcome to this webinar that we've organised on the Construction Playbook and also looking at early supply chain involvement. We've organised this alongside the Construction Leadership Council, CLC, and I hope you find both our speakers and the content of this useful and interesting and useful to engage with. We look forward to your Q&A as we go through. So today's discussion very much on the playbook, and specifically we're hoping to explore how public works projects and programmes should be contracting for early supply chain involvement, and then ultimately to help us as an industry deliver more value for money. You'll see from the slide here, we've got three very interesting speakers, and I'll introduce you to them as we get to each part of the talk as we go through. Hopefully by now you've been on enough webinars to know all of our basic housekeeping, but you may ask questions through the session on the chat box. Your questions should remain anonymous, so anyone's concerned about name or company details being shared, they won't be. We've allowed a reasonable amount of time at the end of the webinar in terms of dealing with Q&A, but if we don't get a chance to answer yours, we will make sure that we come back to you afterwards where possibly we can. So, with no further ado, let me turn and introduce our first speaker. So our first speaker is Mark Ollerton. He's Commercial Director from National Highways. Delighted to have you joining us, Mark. So over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Laurence. I apologies, that slide should say connecting the country, but as I was saying earlier on to my colleagues, the name change and new templates we're just getting to grips with, and apparently National Highways, England is a nation, so it doesn't perhaps upset the other parts of the UK. But anyway, what's a name? Just as a bit of a context, I mean, the ACE, I spent 8 years working for Mott MacDonald before joining the bright side, not the dark side. So a vested interest, and of course, considering that a large proportion of what we do, your members do actually provide a very large content to 90% of the cost being designed in before we start construction. So, yeah, a very relevant topic, I think, at the moment. So if you could move to the next slide, please. I've got a bit of blurb in here, which I'm going to skip through, but it just sets the context. But that's what we do. 95 billion miles annually travelled on the network. And whether or not you know that, but the strategic network, 4,300 miles of motorway and major A roads. Next slide, please. So currently we're in our road investment period 2, having done RIS 1 and quite successfully. We're now investing 27.4 billion in our road network. And I would say that the context of this talk really is a bit of a comparison to what we had with ECI in RIS 1 to the sort of future direction that we're heading for in RIS 2. So that's the scale of the investment that we're putting into our strategic road network. There's a lot of detail I could go into, but I think just to get to the context of early supplier involvement, I think I'm going to skip over that. But if we could go to the next slide, please. So in looking at this, what you have there is I'm repeating back to you really what the Construction Playbook actually says. So I'm not going to read it verbatim, but for the context of what I'm going to talk about in the next slide, early contractor involvement, the change to ESI, it removes the term contractor, and I think that is quite, I think, relevant to what we've seen before. But one of the things that in trying to just isolate ESI is that actually you can't just take that in its single context without looking at all of the attributes of the playbook. And I'm going to put down the side there of a lot of the things that, just to play that message back, that there is a lot more interaction with how you decide and how we decide which type of model, what type of contract. But one of the key things in ECI, ESI is just to be clear that our benchmarking and should cost is quite relevant to the whole situation, because our funding is based on a finite amount of money. and it is based on a particular scheme price. So way before we get into which way and where the route's going to do, we were actually setting a budget. We don't competitively bid work, and our should cost models in effect is 10 years worth of road building data that enable us to set the scheme prices. One of our challenges in both RIS 1 and indeed for RIS 2 is actually holding the design to the budget. Let's say we can be, and certainly the experience in RIS 1, over engineering some of these situations, and we get affordability problems before we get into construction. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of that, but I think you cannot take them individually. That's a key message for me. All of the bits of the playbook actually play together. So you can't just do ESI without considering the other elements of the playbook, and that's the key message I want to make there. If we could flick on to the next slide, please. The A14 was a success, and I'm hand on heart saying not all schemes ended as well as the A14 in RIS 1, and that was under the guise of our collaborative delivery framework, CDF. And what CDF was all about was a collaborative agreement. So it was collaboration between designer, between the contractor, and between us as National Highways. It wasn't any contractual, should I say, binding in that. It was just the concept for everybody to work together to a common set of goals. So ECI has been a model that National Highways has used probably for the last 8 years, and had kind of worked in some ways. The A14 particular success, let me say, it was a successful delivery, 6 months early, delivered on time with a good safety record. However, there was a lot of commercial tension leading up to that point. I think the term value engineering, I used it previously, is that we ended up having to value engineer and to take, not take scope out, but to refine the design. And the designers on that scheme would have me believe that we were getting a Rolls Royce for Mondeo money, is a statement that I'm never going to forget. I don't know if anybody's tried to buy a Rolls Royce for Mondeo money, but that kind of just frames it. But even though we did have early contractor involvement, so the designing the scheme before you get to construction, what was happening and the contractor being involved, so buildability, construction, using the supply chain innovation, anything that they could bring to the design. The theory of it was great. Hand on heart, I think client capability, we were not particularly very good at managing designers. We're not here to manage the technical content down to the level I think that was required. The contractor having and the designer not necessarily having a commercial arrangement between them kind of led that any design issues became the client's problem. The term collaboration in that sense felt to me like, should I say, collaboration is giving us all the money that we need and not having a difficult conversation, perhaps about, well, the scheme budget is the scheme budget, and I would say the A14 has been its success, and I'm grateful for obviously the efforts of the whole team, the designer community, and the contracting community that came together to actually make it a success. And I think those successes are probably built around a single ambition to actually not only create a piece of road network, but it probably doesn't do it justice there, but the whole environment we've actually left in a better state than when we actually found it. So the amount of money that was spent on environmental and archaeology, I would say it was a scheme that became an archaeological dig rather than building a scheme at one point with 256 archaeologists on site. But I think it is a microcosm of what can be done through early contractor involvement. And what we did to that, if you could move to the next slide, please. So a bit of a smorgasbord there of images, but in our current latest versions of the contract models, we've moved from, I would say, a different environment. But one of the key things that the A14 did teach us was to actually look about the control. Certainly what you have there in the graphic on the bottom is a gateway process similar to Network Rail. They call it GRIP, we call it PCF, and we're setting that budget at the pre-project stage at 0. Is actually moving the dial to how you contract these schemes much earlier. So at the minute, during options 1 and 2, we have a designer working up to preferred route assessment or the planning consent to start construction. There's a bit of an overlap into 3, but 3 is where design and construction meets. And what we've done in the future models is to actually nudge the bringing together of design influence and contractor influence and their supply chain much earlier in the process. So ESI, ECI, whichever way you call it, it is actually, we are finding a much better outcome, and the later generation of contracts that support it to actually have moved collaborative delivery into something I'm going to show you on the next slide. But the graphics there, one of the lessons I would say is to actually understand your client capability and your supply chain capability. And that little graphic there on the right hand side is really, we're trying to move an industry that hasn't shifted for 30 years in terms of the way it works. And unless you actually understand your capability, collaboration will work to a degree, but understand the capability that you've got within the supply chain and how agile that they are going to be, because you cannot give them rocket science when we're still actually trying to reinvent the wheel. So, one of the things that market capability that I've got there on the left-hand side, understanding that, creating the long commercial pipeline that in effect shows the forward plan for 10 years. That's what we currently do. And setting up contractual arrangements that are not pop-up projects. They're not here and now. We're not tendering individual schemes, but really working a supply chain and bringing together the best of the capabilities. And just as an outline, the little graphic there shows us our transition, CDF, to something called the Regional Delivery Partnership, or RDP. We've also got the Smart Motorway Alliance, which is, I could spend an hour talking about smart motorways, but conscious of time, if I could move to the next slide, please. I think just need to bring out the points. Oh, sorry, I seem to have lost a slide. If you could just go backwards, sorry. I thought I got another slide. My edits have taken over. So what we have in RDP, in that RDP world, is that what it is actually a design and build. We call it early contractor or early supplier delivery. And what we have in there is that instead of contracting with the designers on their own, at PCF 3 there, the development phase, we contract it's close to design and build contract with the contractor community. So Balfour Beatty, Kia, etc. And what they do is that they subcontract the design and work with their design partner to actually take the scheme through development all the way through to construction. It's in old money, that is, as I say, design and build. But what we've done is to actually put the needle far over to the right-hand side, to the left-hand side, in terms of that engagement at PCF 3. So the whole design process is managed and led by the contractor and the relationship they have with their designer. Some have chose to create an alliance with their designers. Some of them treat them as subcontracts. But that again is another indication perhaps of the maturity of a relationship between contractor and designer. At the moment, all of our RDP schemes are working well. There is quite a bit of commercial tension as getting them into contract at PCF 3. But to actually understand in our model is the pay and gain bit, or the gain side of it, is you keep what you save. So our scheme budgets have, should I say, a challenge in them, but the incentive there is actually the outcome that we want to achieve is we want to make them make more money. We want to enable them to invest and to create better capability in the highway sector. Not without its challenges, but I think that the lights have gone out, marvellous. We've not been paying the bills. So it for me is that early supplier involvement, ECI, is key and critical to to those delivery and successful outcomes. I think the whole of the construction playbook, as I say, you need to take in the whole. Unfortunately, I'd say fortunately, not unfortunately, the development of our current crop of frameworks came in 2019 before the construction playbook. And I'm very pleased, actually, fingers crossed, that actually the messaging that we're using is really good, practical, commercial sense. So we are quite aligned to way that construction book is going. Sorry, that was a quick counter. Sorry, I thought I had an extra slide there. Apologies for that, but look forward to any questions later.
Thank you, Mark. That was really insightful, and it's really interesting to hear how things are already in train, and it's a question of an evolution in terms of where we're going and where you as a client are looking to go next as well. So I'm sure there will be some questions to pick up on that, and we'll certainly come back to you in terms of that maturity and how things are evolving. But for now, I'd like to introduce Scott James Ely, who's going to come and talk to us about the new hospital programme and certainly looking about how a real new programme can come forward. So over to you, Scott James. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. As Laurence said, I'm Scott James Ely, and today I'm joining you from the new hospital programme supply markets management team. I joined the NHP earlier this summer, bringing more than a decade's experience of supply chain engagement and social value programme management, delivering social impact across major constructions and infrastructure programmes, including London 2012 Olympics and High Speed 2. Now, given the stage of development that NHP is currently at, and that being, that our commercial and contractual approaches are still very much in development, the interpretation around kind of early supply chain involvement that I'm going to speak about today is very much a precursor to the form of ECI articulated by the Construction Playbook, but it's something that we think is every bit as important in terms of getting things right from the start. Next slide, please. So let's get down to some basics. So, what is the new hospital programme for those of you who aren't familiar with the detail? Well, simply put, it's the biggest hospital building programme in a generation. It's 48 hospitals across 10 years. As part of the government's health infrastructure plan, the new hospital programme is going to transform the delivery of national healthcare. NHP is also part of the larger government major projects portfolio, which currently covers around 200 UK projects in total, circa 500 billion. NHP currently has got a budget of 3.7 billion, and that's to be invested in the delivery of the health infrastructure plan between now and up to 2025. And that includes the building of new hospitals, it's the modernisation of primary care estate, it's also the build-up of public infrastructure in interconnected areas such as public health and social care, but it's also the investment in new diagnostics and technology and work to eradicate critical safety issues in the NHS estate, and of which NHP sits at kind of the centrepiece of that puzzle. Next slide, please. Now, NHP is a new client organisation, and that's a joint team between the Department for Health and Social Care and NHS England and NHS Improvement. And the setting up of NHP client really does represent a shift towards a more centralised programme-based approach, and it's heavily premised on driving modern methods of construction and appropriate standardisation. And the benefits that NHP is expected and indeed kind of committed to achieve can really only be realised via this kind of progressive programmatic approach. Next slide, please. Now, the vision and principles for the programme are, as you'd expect, very broad, not only in the way in which we plan to procure and interact with the supply chain, but also through kind of further collaboration with industry, leading with digital design, evaluating, embracing social values, implementing modern methods of construction, developing sensible contract models with sustainable profit margins. Now, the NHP is a sustained program, and that's going to allow learning to be disseminated and shared throughout the program, but especially between the trusts. And that's, to reduce rework, duplicated effort, whilst also accelerating that adoption of best practice. And this is all, to better the NHS for the future, and in turn make a change for society, for the common good. Next slide, please. Now, no doubt this is going to be complicated. We recognise that the current industry delivery model and how this needs to change for this programme. And that's how we can deliver value for the NHS in line with the Construction Playbook. First of all, NHP is a new, relatively unknown client. We need to start driving appetite, so supply markets will come and join our team, come and help deliver this, amazing and very challenging programme. There are still various strategies that we need to understand and build on, and still very much in their infancy, whether that's looking at modern methods of construction, digital, the journey to net zero carbon. And whilst these are a constraint, we are proactively walking towards those solutions. And with early supply market involvement, we can only accelerate that process. Obviously, cost is a constraint, would be on any programme. But with the NHS and the complexity and scale of NHP, there's something that's more important than ever. Mistakes in costs for these projects quite literally can equate to life and death. But that's why we want to implement so many beneficial changes to the traditional approach, and need the supply chain to be involved from the very beginning to drive that value. Time, another obvious constraint. It's an ambitious, multifaceted program, very complex, significant scale, but being wrapped up within a 10-year program. We also know that perception and market appetite for the health sector is an issue. We want to break down the prejudice and stereotypes that have come to be discussed around the health sector, being complicated, being risky. Yes, it is, but that's what makes it such a great challenge, and that's what's satisfying about finding solutions that help support and nurture the efficiencies of healthcare for generations to come. Also, market capacity is a real constraint for us. We know that we need to make new markets. We've got to stimulate growth. We've got to drive inward investment. Some of the initial market engagement that's been completed today, and that includes some early work completed by the IPA prior to the NH team coming together, has indicated there's not enough capacity in the supply markets. Next slide, please. All of which kind of leads to why we are actively engaged in early supply market involvement at a very early stage of the program. We know that maximizing market appetite for the upcoming NHP business opportunities is going to be vital for us over the coming months and years. We've got to make sure that we're able to secure the capacity and innovation needed to deliver the program, whilst ultimately delivering the best value. So Chetna, can you move the slide on, please? Can you go back? Sorry, I think you've jumped a few forward there. There should be one between. No, okay, I'll carry on. So the new hospital program, we're going to be engaging the supply base to ensure that it is, first of all, appropriately informed, it's visible, and also responsible throughout the commercial life cycle. Our market engagement program seeks to, first of all, mobilise the UK supply chain for the upcoming new hospital program procurement process. It's also about stimulating market forming, but also really importantly, it's about obtaining kind of new hospital program focused market intelligence. Crucially, we've got to capture that pre-procurement supplier input into the commercial strategy, and then packaging and procurement strategies. Alongside tactical messaging focused on very specific sectors or procurement exercises, we're going to be engaging the market on our strategic goals. And that includes areas such as how the supply chain that delivers NHP can make huge strides in delivering the NHS ambitions around net zero carbon. This is all about ensuring the market both understands and can contribute to NHP's higher level strategic ambitions. But it's also about gauging supplier readiness to work as partners towards our longer term ambitions and facilitating the development of supplier capabilities, and supporting suppliers of all types and sizes to navigate how we do business within HP. Now, we formally launched the programme of early supply market involvement back in June of this year, and we did that through publishing a prior information notice, or PIN, and that informed suppliers at NHP wished to commence market involvement and consultation, and invited suppliers who'd like to engage with NHP to register directly via a smart survey. Since then, we've had more than 400 suppliers who've registered directly to learn more about the programme, and we've had something like 360 businesses who've engaged directly through some market-specific engagement events that we've held, such as an M&P-focused roundtable that we held with Actuate back in July. Now, we recognise that it's absolutely key that the NHP develops and maintains strong collaborative working relationships with umbrella bodies, trade associations, whilst also working alongside other business support agencies. These stakeholders have got those well-established networks and are recognised as, independent representatives of their sectors, and that's, one of the reasons why our relationship with ACE is so crucially important to us. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the ways in which we are seeking that early supply chain involvement and how we're going to engage with the market in a collaborative and kind of informative way. And as we evolve through the programme and start to plan for procurements, we're going to be delivering some, really market-specific engagement exercises. We'll be inviting feedback on emerging procurement approaches and strategies. We're going to be hosting industry days where we'll be sharing key information around specific packages and transfer of work. But we're also looking to establish a think tank, and that's going to call on industry representatives such as trade bodies, academia, government departments such as BEIS, Innovate UK, along with trust representation. And that's really all about helping us solve the challenges we face in market forming and market growth initiatives. We'll also be working with other client bodies to understand the lessons learned in key commercial areas through a commercial directors group. And we're going to be establishing a CEO's forum. And this is very specifically will be for kind of tier 2 and below, and looking how we can stimulate inward investment, build capacity and capability. Next slide, please. Now, I'll finish off with a very shameless plug. Hopefully everyone on the webinar today potentially has got a really important role to play in supporting the delivery of NHP. So if you've not already done so, I invite you please complete our NHP market engagement survey, which you can do through pointing your phone's camera at the QR code on screen now. That means we can keep in touch with you regarding future engagement events, but also please feel free to send us questions anytime using our dedicated NHP emails that you see on the screen there. Thank you very much.
Scott, James, thanks very much indeed for that. There's certainly an awful lot of things going through my mind in terms of the challenge you face, but also how you're going about it. So I'm sure there'll be some questions for you when we get to the Q&A session. So just a reminder to everyone, if you have got a question that's come up from either the presentations or the one to come, please do put them in the chat box and we can pick up on those at the end. But our final speaker is Dave Corbin from ACE member Gleeds. And Dave, over to you in terms of, not so much from a client point of view, but from your enhanced view.
Yeah, thanks, Laurence. And it's great to hear what's going on with National Highways and the NHP team. I think there's some truly exciting times ahead for both those organisations and hopefully ACE members. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dave Corbin. I am the Head of Programme and Project Management for Gleeds in the UK, and I'm also the Chair of the APM's Wessex branch. So I've been asked to talk, well, what I want to do is talk about early supply chain involvement in the context of the wider industry challenges that we face. And I think Mark mentioned that, we've got to look at the playbook and take all of the parts together to make a change, and I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly. Several years ago, I was always fascinated by the productivity stats around construction, and always kind of gawed that we're the kind of laggards of the UK economy. And so whilst the two charts on the screen slightly differ in terms of the data, they kind of present the same result, which is that construction is below average in the UK economy, and by far has not improved anywhere near as much as others may have done over the years. And I think we have to then look at, well, why is that? Because it's not through the want of recognizing the issue and recognizing the need to make change, but yet still seeing limited impact. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So apologies, quite congested slide. I had this plan that I'd introduce these one by one, but not to be today. The first I personally recall of a kind of partnering-led ethos was when Michael Latham's report came out, Constructing the Team, in 1994. That was kind of felt like quite quickly followed by Sir John Egan's report in 1998, Rethinking Construction. And it was at that point that I saw the first drill down into the partnering and the collaboration of the early supply chain engagement. And even then, talking about componentization of design. So, and then since then we had the government construction strategy in 2011, followed by 2016. We have the Farmer report. I've been quite interested in watching the journey of Project 13 as a new way of contracting. And then obviously at the end of last year, we have the Construction Playbook coming out, which I think really captures a number of the key issues that need to be addressed if we are going to make a real change. And all of these industry-led reports and views and findings and initiatives all appear to be driving for the same goal. So I guess the question that I have there is, is now the time to make a change, or are we destined for another 23 years of failed attempts to improve? So if I can go on to the next slide, please. So is now the time, and I think there are three good reasons why change is on the horizon at a more accelerated pace. Firstly, we are in the fourth industrial revolution. Available technology is all around us, and it's there to be adopted. And I think we are at the bottom of a very steep curve of technological changes in the construction industry, the way we design things, the way we manage things, certainly the way we build things. I also think that following the demise of Carillion, the increased profile of the construction industry will support change. The recognition that the current contracting models, the low margins, the sustainability of our very sector all adds to the storyboard of why we need to make some significant changes to the way we do things. And then more recently, the market volatility that's come about through both Brexit and COVID means that it's starting to hit clients in the pocket, and we have to really start thinking about how we drive projects forward and generate most value for our clients, given the material shortages, given the labour shortages, given the level of uncertainty and the reduced appetite to take on risk. So I do think now is a great time to try and make some serious inroads into a new model. Next slide, please, Jenna. So one of the so I think that when I look back over the last 23 years, I can think of countless examples where early supply chain involvement has been of benefit to a client. I think there's no doubt. In fact, I'd actually almost argue that it's probably the one area of all those initiatives that we've taken more seriously and have embraced. I'll come back to that, but I do think there's loads of good examples. Not the Grange University Hospital, but quite recently with the Hereford Cyber Centre, we had the early involvement of a structural supplier for some cross-laminated timber frames, and we, in conjunction with a logistics supply chain, we were able to agree how to componentize those structural timbers in order so they could be delivered to site in a more effective way. That drove benefit to the client in terms of both time and cost. Grange University Hospital, a major new build hospital that was completed last year. We were able to work alongside Lang O'Rourke's supply chain and reduce the construction period from 197 weeks to 137 weeks, a saving of 23%. And now that's compelling enough in its own right, but actually in the midst of COVID, achieving a handover significantly earlier and making beds available was clearly a priority. And it was only possible through that engagement with the overall supply chain. Next slide, please. Another initiative we've been looking at recently is how we might use AI to increase project predictability at the early stages. And we've been working with a small firm, Greyfly, who are funded by Innovate UK to look at a proof of concept. And the idea behind this is that by using the industry data that's made available from all the various suppliers within the community, we can then target areas of risk and issues that would then be focused on in order to increase predictability of outcome before going too far and investing too much time or money. Next slide, please. And this screenshot's a little bit old, it's from 2018, but it's the last I saw. The DFE have been driving early supply chain involvement for some time, where they contract with the constructor team before any design is undertaken. A bit of design, but pretty much leaving the design to the constructors team. They're just about to let their new construction framework. It's now default modern methods of construction, having componentized design. More recently, they're now driving the net zero carbon in operation process, once again by engaging specialists at the very outset of the project brief and determining how we achieve that through using best-in-class subject matter experts. So I think there's loads of great examples of how early supply chain involvement is benefiting the product. So the question I then have is the contracting mechanism right? Now, I don't know how many people are aware of what the Isle of Wight did back in 2004, but they, in my mind, were at the forefront of thinking. They let a partnership to deliver their schools programme where there was effectively an arranged marriage between the successful consultant and successful contractor team to work as an integrated team to deliver their commissions. Now, the result of that was year-on-year Gershon savings were known as at the time. That's not a phrase I hear very often anymore. And it was a mechanism that was contracted via the NEC suite of contracts and had a shared pain gain incentive that was shared between the consultant and constructor teams and the client organisation. And that drove a collaborative behaviour. Now, when I look back on that experience, and I was fortunate enough to be the integrator, so the integrator role is not new. I was fortunate enough to be the integrator. And when I reflect back on it, I think about the confrontational nature of construction, where you have a client and a contractor and that agreement between them. And actually, my recollection, my thoughts on it were that it didn't actually change the level of confrontation. It just shifted where the confrontation occurred. So it was doing the right thing in trying to make sure the team worked collaboratively, but it was still fundamentally a contract between two parties that was not necessarily built up or on trust or trust. So I thought that it was a great step forward, but I don't really see that having really succeeded widespread in the market. So when I look at things like Project 13, I look at it with a bit of skepticism about, will it really change? Going back to that question, will we face another 23 years of being the economy's laggards? Next slide, please. So for me, there's a massive challenge for our industry. We are, I talked about that culture that needs to be built on trust and collaboration, and we've got to find a way of achieving that. We've got to adopt the available technologies to improve our productivity, and then widespread sharing of information needs to prevail, which is still an issue. For me personally, I think the biggest issue and the biggest area that we need to address is the ownership of risk and the management of it. Is it right to simply sell the risk that you hold for a sum of money and allow someone then to survive or not based on their own judgment? Or should risk be shared and retained and dealt with by the right people at the right time in the right way, in a collaborative way? So I'll leave you with this thought, and it's what I think is the ultimate challenge for our industry, and it's going from football, which is a tribal set of fans, confrontational at its best, doing anything they possibly can to get one over the other, to rugby, where you sit together, you may even share a pint, enjoy the game, and enjoy the ride. So that to me is the real industry challenge. And I, for one, don't know how we're going to get, Millwall and West Ham sitting in the stands together at the next football game, but that's what I think we need to try and achieve. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Dave. I'm definitely going to keep away from sporting analogies as we move forwards, but no, thank you very much for that, and thanks to all of our speakers. So a reminder, if anyone does have any questions, please use the chat function and we'll go through them. But actually, Dave, can I start with you then? So you've talked earlier on in your presentation about the journey we've been through in terms of the different reports that have been done and the like, but it almost sounds as though what you're saying is, do you know what, the Construction Playbook's got good intent, but has it actually taken us any forward, or is it merely sort of rearranging things that were already in play? And you've given some good examples of things that were already happening. So has it taken us forward? Does it have everything to take us forward, or do you think there's something missing in it?
I think it's taken us forward in the sense that it's mandated for public sector bodies to adopt the principles of it, and I think the public sector has a massive role to play in driving forward new agendas. I don't know how long. If I put a number on it, I'd say that BIM has been around for about 10 years, and it's only now starting to get traction in the private sector. So I think there is a journey that we need to go on, and the public sector have a role in driving it, and the playbook does that. I do have a number of private sector clients disagreeing with a number of the principles of the playbook, and do not believe it's the answer to successful development. So we'll see how it lands more widely spread, but for now I think it's a great start.
Okay. Thank you. So and Scott, James, you've mentioned that sitting there with the hospital program, you're at the start of quite a journey, and from the presentation you've given, from what we've seen in terms of your engagement, everything is an open door. You're certainly inviting an awful lot of engagement. So, on behalf of the industry, you're doing all the right things, but are we doing the right things? Are we responding to you, or are we all registering and then sitting and listening? Have we offered you, a benefit from that engagement? What have you seen from the industry?
Oh no, I mean, absolutely. The appetite to engage has been phenomenal, and we've seen exactly the kind of response that we'd want. We've even had, comments from a number of the trade associations with it. they don't usually get engaged with until something's out, to be procured. So they found it, phenomenally refreshing, the opportunity. Obviously, it's a double-edged sword. The earlier that you engage in a program, the less certainty and answers that you have, and that there's always that potential to frustrate people that they're asking lots of questions that we're not able to answer. But I think if both sides are entering into the spirit that if you want to be involved in shaping those answers, we accept that there's going to be more uncertainty early on. But no, we found that engagement has been phenomenal. There's been some very consistent messages coming back, regardless of which part of the market that we have engaged with. All have welcomed and want the conversation and dialogue and collaboration to carry on, and all of them have emphasised how important kind of early sight of pipeline is for influencing, where their appetite and their capacity and capability goes, and we take that to heart and are hopefully responding accordingly.
That's great to hear. And yeah, sorry, Dave.
If I may come in on that, because I think the NHP program is a hugely exciting opportunity for industry, and if I understand it correctly, it's a hugely transformational journey that the front of the end of the process will look entirely different to the end of the framework or alliancing. And so finding a way of contracting for that flexible support network that you need over a long period of time, I think is fundamental to that kind of long-term contracting element of the playbook. So for one, I declare my interest. I'm hugely excited to see how that looks when it comes out to market in its final form.
No, absolutely. I mean, where we end up is going to be very different where we started. Accepting that this is going to be kind of a generational process is a key part of that market engagement, and help people understand that there's the number of schemes that are in flight now that are going to look very different from the ones that come next. But then those after 2025 are going to look very different again, and the contractual modules will naturally evolve to meet that challenge.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Dave, at the end of your piece there, you talked about the ownership of risk. In terms of that, Scott, James, have you started looking at and thinking about that? Have industry started to engage with you in terms of that ownership of risk and how that could be a really key step in taking things forward?
Yes, absolutely. That's it's been part of the early engagement thus far. Obviously, risk needs to sit, where it is, best able to be mitigated. People have very different views about where that can be. But again, it's part of the kind of the high level kind of commercial approach that we have shared with the market to date. A key part of that, recognizing the need to kind of drive some market forming, is the potential for the distance between the client and some parts of the supply chain to be shortened. Recognizing that that's one of the ways in which we can address appropriate risk placement. But it's an evolving picture, but certainly that's been a key part of the feedback I've had so far is the extent to which people's experience of risk on previous healthcare programs influences that appetite for NHP.
Could I probably just thinking about the risk profile, just to add to that, I think you've got to recognise that actually in the current environment that, and I'm seeing it, is there's a very low appetite for risk from both design and contracting communities. And one of the things that, lower Thames at the minute, the market engagement on that says actually they're only willing to put 2% of fee or 2% of profit at risk for any event. That doesn't feel like sharing of risk. That is actually making it more the client risk than anything else. So I think understanding the market, understanding these dynamics that are currently happening at any point of any economic intervention, with everything else that's going off, I think is quite key and quite critical, because it certainly doesn't feel like, and Project 13 I think is a great window into where the issues are. So contractors chasing turnover and very thin margin, designers chasing, should I say, a large amount of productivity and utilization of staff. Those two things are really fighting against each other when you think about whatever commercial model you put in. So, one of the playbook outputs, just playing that forward, is actually looking at outcomes, not man hours, not it actually turns it on its head. When we think about digital and think about digital risk and BIM models, I remember working on a BIM model on Sizewell B 30 years ago. So that was a rudimentary BIM model. Why haven't we adopted more of that? And a question really for ACE and your members is that doing things significantly quicker with less people, I think, is a hiatus in design that says, actually, I'm paying you for an outcome. And we're kind of trying to do that with RDP, is that we're paying you to deliver a design within a budget. But the underlying tension, or should I say risk, probably always comes back to, I'd like to use BIM, but I want you as a client to define what BIM looks like. Well, the amount of people that tell me they're experts in BIM these days, bring it on. But I think, and I think all of our infrastructure, the key to that is understanding supply chain, understand the dynamic that's currently going on. Risk appetite, I think, is a really key one at the moment. But ultimately, longer term planning, longer term engagement, setting a pipeline that runs more than just one scheme, I think, is a key to unlocking a lot of that future investment and development. So, sorry, a bit of a waffle there, but
no, and it's a good challenge you raised back to the consultant and the contractor side of the market. So it was interesting for me there, Mark, is in your talk you talked about the trying to move away from the sort of pain gain to the offer of a gain. And Dave had the words pain gain on one of his slides as well. And I think almost there's a language piece that needs to be moved on there, because there's almost this, the word pain is put in there to try and demonstrate we're sharing, but immediately it sort of sets us into how do we manage our way through the conflict and protect our interests rather than actually collaborate to put it together. You're obviously have delivered and are delivering projects, and then the playbook arrives in the middle of things that are already up and running. In terms of the evolution that you're seeing, though, you mentioned the industry you thought was sort of being slow and evolving. Do you think that National Highways is waiting for the industry to catch it up, or is there what more should the industry be doing, or is the answer almost the bit you've just given?
A classic, I wrote the term down but didn't mention it, is that we're after revolution at evolutionary pace. Because if I go back to CDF, collaborative delivery, it was the vogue at the time, and the supply chain engagement said, let's be collaborative. The reality wasn't quite perhaps the outcome that we got to. But I think, again, I'm looking at something that runs in our license to 2040. And the horizon about changing an industry doesn't happen either through a contract or it takes time. And to make a step change, which we probably think we should be doing, I think takes longer to embed that all the way through the supply chain. You have still got people down at the very bottom end of the supply chain that aren't commercial, still producing manual handwritten timesheets. Asking what a P6 integrated program looks like, they haven't got a clue. So there's a long reach into to actually the trades that are actually doing the work back to your tier one, and I think it is changing. It is turning an oil tanker. You are trying to change an industry, and we are poised at a point of inflection. There is no doubt. Digital, modular, offsite manufacture, all of those things are things that we want our supply chain to bring to us. But changing the habits of 30 years of the client is, I would say, not say an easy target, but you probably get what I mean, is that, and if things go wrong, but the amount of time we spend on value engineering, you design something, you can't afford it, you go back and do it again and do it again. Get it right first time. The Geary initiative back in 2015, that for me is just a bit of basic thing that we just need to get back to. And in some ways, I term a phrase getting the basics right, because if you can't get those basics right, then whatever digital is going to do to us, whatever things are going to come at us in the future, then unless you've got a good baseline to actually work to, and some of the basics, I think is not to lose sight of them. So in my view, going forward, long-term relationship with our supply chain, actually helping them, helping us to develop our contracts, develop our schemes, that actually means that I want them to be doubling their profit margin, not getting into pain. And a successful contractor, a successful designer can invest and then move forward. Then we're actually creating a bigger thing than just highways. It is a changing an industry to become more profitable, more productive, increase its productivity by just trying things in different ways. And that takes time.
Thank you for that. I think that productivity challenge is there's another session in its own right just around that, in terms of how we drive that through, isn't it? And it's interesting how you refer to we've almost got so used to we have to have an inefficient process because we've got so used to it, and making marginal adjustment rather than absolute step changes. Just looking at one of the questions that's come in, we're talking about how can we actually get that engagement, but at the same time leave clients from, I will use side of the fence for the minute, but clients want that flexibility. And one of the comments here in the chat is around actually clients not wanting to narrow their choices. How does anyone on the panel think we can actually provide that effective input that people will engage with, that people will listen to, provide that flexibility for the clients, but also a commitment to the client to actually engage, take things forward and be part of it? I think there's a wariness of offering things up sometimes for it almost to be taken as commercial advantage and the gain in that pain gain world given up too early. I think there might be a piece there. Mark?
I could very quickly answer that, because I think the intellectual property thing, competitive advantage is for me as a client. I mentioned that we don't competitively bid and get the lowest price. What we are shifting to, and if you think outputs, and actually we're looking for best value. And even though all the way through the supply chain, so even the tier one, how they procure is quite important. And in very simple terms, I think how you narrow choices is quite interesting. But for me, it's long-term relationships. Mm-hmm. It's having a pipeline of work that you can see and as I say, invest with. Does that exclude some areas of the market? It may do, because you can't have both. You can't have a long-term relationship and keep changing different suppliers. And we need consistency to actually become. So instead of chasing the lowest price, it is shifting the dial to what is the best value. Yes. Because best value may mean paying more in a particular context, but actually getting better value or better outcome as a result. And that is takes some challenges, should I say. And we have done that with Treasury and Cabinet Office. So we do not compete on price, because we know what stuff should cost. Yeah. So therefore, it's what value you can add. Sorry, I'm not sure if that answers the question, but
it leaves us with a really good challenge. And as we've got literally just a couple of minutes until we get to the end of the hour, I think it's a good challenge to go away with. And I think what's great, and I'm really grateful to you, Mark, and Scott James, as two clients who have long-term programs of work, have the opportunity to take that learning and take it on to the next project and through a program, and actually help us as an industry improve and develop. I think that's a really great place to be. So may I, on behalf of everybody on the talk at ACE and as the CLC as well, thank all of our speakers for joining us. Thanks very much to Mark and National Highways, to Scott James with New Hospitals, and to Dave with the view from Gleeds and the consultancy side. That's been a really informative hour. I've certainly learned a lot myself. I hope everyone on the call has learned something too. And there's a reminder to engage with Scott James on the programme. He's open to engagement, and let's as an industry bring our best foot forward and keep designing inefficiency in. I think that would be a really positive thing. So here's the playbook, and Dave, to your challenge, definitely not 23 years for more until we improve or revisit this again. To everybody, thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you,
Laurence. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.